All right, Marina, the last couple days of the session, we're here for ACLU on the Hill. You've got now hours left instead of days. How does this feel?
It feels pretty weird. This is the strangest session that I have seen the end of. As you can see, it's sort of a ghost town. Coronavirus hysteria has definitely hit the Capitol.
Wow.
And so there are not a lot of people up here. It's definitely very quiet, and unusually so for the second to last day of the session.
That's true. So no handshakes are happening these days.
No handshakes, no face-to-face meetings. They've gotten rid of notes that are usually passed in to senators and representatives. Definitely a change in the way lobbying is being done. A
surreal ending to this session, but still bills are being discussed and passing. Why don't we recap some of the important things that happened during the 2020 session?
Sure.
Let's start off with HB 206. That would be the bail reform bill from Representative Stephanie Pitcher, a bill that is really setting the stage for some new and future legislation, we hope, but with a good foundation.
Yeah, so this bill passed out of the Senate this morning with a really healthy vote. It was very exciting to see that because there had been lots of opposition, but from a single voice, and that's the bail industry, who has a financial stake, of course, in any questions around bail reform. The bill itself was the product of a lot of work and negotiation with a variety of stakeholders, everybody from the chiefs of police to the prosecutors to the criminal defense lawyers and groups like the ACLU.
Gotcha, and I think it passed out of the Senate committee after about 3 or 4 minutes of discussion as these last couple days going, but one of the big points there was almost 40 or 50% of folks that are in jail right now are there for pretrial detention, which means they're there because they can't afford their bail, not that they've been convicted.
Right, and one of the important things that this bill does is ask a judge to make a finding about whether or not somebody can afford to pay financial bail, and so that I think is going to be very critical. Many of the lawsuits, as you probably know, that have been brought across the nation hinge on this question of whether there's unequal treatment between those who have the means to bail out of jail and those who stay incarcerated because they just don't have the money to bail out.
So an important victory for criminal justice reform and a bill I know you worked a lot on. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Next bill we want to discuss is SB 185. That is the jail transparency bill, a bill that takes the grammar requests and other sort of litigation the ACLU has been working on and putting it into legislation. I've lost track of this bill. Has it passed?
No, it hasn't yet. So it has to pass the House.
Okay.
And we're just waiting for it to be read back in onto the House floor. It may actually be there right now, but I suspect they may be wiping the boards at some point. So we're waiting for a final vote on that in the House before it goes into law. But as you mentioned, this is the culmination of a lot of work that the ACLU has done through the GRAMA process and through litigation to get at jail standards and audits, inspections of jails, and to make sure that these are public records under GRAMA, which is what the legislation would do.
Because we fought for years saying that these are public records, and we've been rebuffed by different committees, the jails themselves, their lawyers, and even the people who wrote the standards. So
that's true, although we did get a positive ruling out of the courts just in October, and this is just making this abundantly clear by placing it in statute as well.
Cool. Well, congratulations on your work on that bill as well. Let's hope it pushes across the finish line in these last couple of hours.
Right.
One area where the ACLU has definitely been playing defense, and with our partners like Planned Parenthood and Alliance for Better Utah, is on reproductive rights and the abortion bills. You were there last night when the Senate voted on HB, 364, the mandatory ultrasound bill. Can you describe what happened in the Senate chamber last night?
Yeah, it was really a powerful and sort of stirring moment that took place on the floor. So we had been in conversation with some of these senators prior to the bill coming up and knew that there was going to be an amendment run on the bill. Senator Henderson stood up and wanted to make sure that transvaginal ultrasound could not be used for satisfying the requirements of the bill. After she got up to place that motion, every single woman in the Senate stood up to speak on the bill, which is quite unusual to have both that many people speak on a bill and to have it uniformly be every single woman in the Senate, regardless of political affiliation. After that time, the vote was called, and it quickly became apparent that there were no women on the floor at all. They had all left in protest. And so what resulted is that this bill that forces a mandatory procedure, unwanted procedure on a woman, was voted on only by men.
Gotcha. And it passed last night.
Extremely narrowly.
Yes. Okay. So That is a bill that we have been working on over and over. There still are some opportunities to potentially stop that bill. Is that right?
It goes back over to the House at this point because the House would need to concur with the amendments that were made in the Senate. And then, of course, goes on to the governor, who has an opportunity to weigh in as well.
Gotcha. A bill that definitely has raised concerns, especially among Republican lawmakers that have been forced to vote on it as an overreach. So that bill, along with the full abortion ban from Senator McCay and the fetal remains bill from Senator Bramble, are sort of the trio of reproductive rights bills that we face this year.
Yeah.
It's been a little tough to kind of get through them. What is one thing that you've learned from working on these bills this year? Does it go back to the survey that we unveiled at the beginning of the session?
Well, opponents have really pushed back on that survey and tried to minimize its importance. The conclusion, of course, was that 80% of Utahns don't want to see more abortion restrictions. We've seen repeatedly that the legislature doesn't seem to care oftentimes what the voters say, and so that's not entirely surprising. I will say the mandatory ultrasound bill, I think, is probably the most sort of surprising in that you got this sense from lawmakers that maybe this was going too far, that there is a limit to what bills and policies can be pushed in the name of protecting life, that they can push too far, and it feels like on that bill they may have overreached a bit. Especially
with the powerful symbolism of the 6 women in the Senate walking off the floor last night. Okay. One other area I'd like to touch on would be privacy and technology. We had some incredible victories during the 2019 session. I'm thinking of HB 57, the cloud-based data Fourth Amendment protection bill that you worked on. This year, we had a couple of bills on DNA privacy and facial recognition that never really got off the floor. Is there a season to this type of legislation that you need to wait a little bit between pushing it?
I think what it is there's been an explosion of a lot of new technology and a lot of excitement on the part of law enforcement to make use of this technology, and so there was a lot of heavy opposition. So we'll just regroup, and we've got some good thoughts about the directions we need to head in order to make sure that Utahns' privacy is protected, and we've got lots of opportunities to work in the coming years.
And one thing we've learned, and you especially, is that sometimes things don't pass the first year they're introduced at the Capitol.
Actually, oftentimes major legislation takes multiple years in order to
Gotcha.
pass.
So we'll be back on privacy and technology, and including focusing on the new company Banjo, which has been written up in the press quite a bit. There's some inklings of legislation that could be worked on during interim session and be ready for the next session. Is that right?
There's at least interest, yes.
Okay.